Ladies and gentlemen, so glad to be back on the Ben Stewart podcast. Every now and then I go out of town and there's a little bit of time where we don't have some podcasts. I'm super happy to be back with all of you. Today, I really have to say I have an incredible guest coming all the way from Southeast Asia. Her name is Enna Raytor and is a traditional cultural anthropologist, a linguist, a regenerative farmer, a polyglot, and that's many languages for those of you who are looking for Google right now, and a contemplative meditator. Her father was a diplomat. She did the main part of her the writing of this book, Kripta, The Godtrix versus the Matrix, which is incredible. In Southeast Asia, where she is live with us today. It is her morning, it is our evening, and I'm super excited to get to it. So let's get to it on the Ben Stewart podcast. We are here. Thank you so much, Enna, for being with us today.
And thank you for inviting me on. It's a treat.
We got Gordo over here pushing the buttons. Thank you for being with us, Gordo.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I have to say that so one of my last trips out of town was out to see Paul Chek in right around the San Diego area. And Paul Chek has Living 4D with Paul Chek podcast. And then also we had Kyle Kingsbury out there. Kyle Kingsbury has the Kyle Kingsbury podcast out in Austin. And they were the ones who turned me on to this book. And I have to say, I was pleasantly blown away. I get offered a lot of books to read, and the ones that approach such topics that are found here in this book, which are absolutely incredible. A lot of what you will have heard me talk about in the past are written with such detail in this book, but not just the outward exterior, the externalization of what I would call an agenda that's happening on this planet right now, and we are seeing it accelerate in the past couple years. But also the role of each human being within, and what does it mean? How can we be a fully realized, at the peak of our potential human being, so we can even first conceptualize what it is we're dealing with out here, and then have the capacity to engage with what is mine to do in this world. And I really appreciated this book. So, Enna, I would have to, the first thing I'm going to launch into is, I want to know, well, I guess first, what launched you to writing this book? I'm going to ask you about the title here, but I want to know, what was it that happened in the world? When did you write it? When did you publish it? And what was the impetus for writing this book?
Well, it just demanded to be written. Kind of the realization came all of a sudden sometime in May or June of 2020. We were locked down, and I had time, and I was contemplating all the stuff that was happening, and a friend said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I got really pissed off because I've only ever written academic books, which I had sworn to myself I would never write again. And, having happily become a peasant, I think, I thought, okay, I've paid my dues to the god of writing. And, okay, I decided this would have to be a book that goes through the whole complexity of the human adventure over the past several millennia to explain, at least to me, first of all, and then if it's worth anything, to explain to others where we're at, how we got here, why we got here, what it tells us about who we really are, and where we're going if we make the choice to go where we really should go. So yeah, it just happened. And I just wrote every day, every day, every day. And it possessed me more and more. I went through, very, very dark aspects of the largely hidden history of humankind. Got very sick at times, having to process it, physically to get it, purge it out, to detox. And came out the other end feeling truly liberated, by having gone through all that, digested all that, understood many of the dimensions of it, of the tricks, the God tricks in which we've been trapped. And since then, been able to recover, what is the true matrix? Matrix means womb. It's the feminine. It's Mother Earth. It's nature. It's our own mothers. It's the mother in all of us. And it has had the effect of, because of the deep understanding, taking away all the fear and knowing my place in what's happening now. So yeah, that's how it happened. And I mean, it was, for a book that I didn't want to write, it was remarkably, I wouldn't say easy, because it's not easy to weave together the different, the many different complex dimensions of that particular journey. But, serendipity would have the right source fall into my lap at the right time. It was a lot of work, but at the same time, kind of miraculous in the way it unfolded. So it's not even a book, okay, I wrote it. It was processed through me, but to a large extent, it's not a book that my ego wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's chock full of topics that I've been onto for quite some time, and one of them, I think it was Michael Tsarion that first turned me on to even the understanding of the word Elohim. But you talk about high-tech Elohim in here, and just for the audience, we even have down here in the chat, I think it was Jeffrey Cummings saying, "What is the long game of the gods?" Let's understand that there's a new story of where we come from and what our past and our history is, and that is not just highly censored, but it is a weak shell of the stories that have been lost, not just the book burnings, but cataclysms and just the passing of time. If you would go back a couple hundred years, it wouldn't actually seem so weird to say that there were strange, let's say, religious or spiritual or otherworldly events that happened long ago here, and big wars and cataclysms, and that the gods were a part of this. But when you mention the gods in here, or the Elohim, what is it that you're referring to here, and how do we get from that to high-tech Elohim?
Okay. Now, I have to preface this with the clarification that, I'm not a specialist in a huge number of topics that I've had to cover to be able to bring the puzzle together in the book. So I have used, my academic past to be able to read and use other people's work in a respectful and congruent way. Now, I'm no specialist of the Bible. I'm no specialist in ancient Hebrew, but I know enough about ancient languages. I've had my, full dose of Greek, Latin, and quite a bit of Sanskrit. So, I can recognize an author who is giving me information that is based on a true knowledge, a deep knowledge of an ancient language or several ancient languages. And so for the whole Elohim chapter, I lean on the work of Mauro Biglino, who worked for many years for the official publications from Hebrew for the Vatican. And one day he came out of that closet and decided, no, I want to be able to write books about what the Hebrew texts really say, without the spiritualizing veneer and the rewriting of the church and of the priests in the era prior to the common era, prior to Jesus Christ. And so he comes out with several books, and some of them are now published in English also, where he's every one of his titles is very clear, to the effect that, the God of the Ancient Testament is no God. So the word Elohim, as he translates it, and he is in correspondence with Hebrew scholars around the world, who basically are in agreement about this. Basically, it just means administrators, governors, lords. It's an ambivalent
the title.
The word El, yeah. So he says that El is the singular, and Elohim is the plural. And Elohim, as applied to just Yahweh, well, in the context of each particular utterance of the Bible, does it put him in a collective, or does it apply a collective sense to him specifically? That could be debated by linguists, but that's not the point, I think, where we're going here. But basically, these are categories of beings that are that lord it over ordinary humans, and that are, governors, colonizers. And the adventure of the Elohim, as Biglino portrays it, is basically it's an adventure of colonization of the Near and the Middle East by the Elohim, who seem to be the successors to what we call the Anunnaki. Either the same or successors. Mm-hmm. So, I have not gone into the details of how the Anunnaki become the Elohim. That's really not my, that's not my field of expertise. However, when Biglino comes up with these explanations, and then the high-tech Elohim, right? Because the words that are translated in the Ancient Testament as the glory of God and the seraphim and the cherubim, when Biglino gives you the literal translation word by word from the authoritative Masoretic Hebrew translation text, rather, and he looks at the Greek translation, and he tells us in Italian what the words actually mean, well, you've got high-tech devices which sort of create big sort of huge light, unnatural light, and they can, they kill people that's on sight, and they sort of rise up in the sky. I mean, the glory of God, this what's the word? It's not the ephod, that's another one, the breastplate. I mean, the different technological terms that are spiritualized. Actually, in Biglino's rendition, it's very clear that they're ET machinery.
Wow.
And, when you look at it in that sense, and then you look at the actions of Yahweh with his so-called chosen people, suddenly things make sense in a totally different way that we can actually use in terms of trying to reweave a history of how the gods, in what will gradually become organized, institutionalized religion, have devised very, very, very excellent tools for controlling us. It was very violent under the Anunnaki and under the Elohim. Some Elohim more than others, and Yahweh seems to have been, perhaps the worst of them all. And yeah, so that's the, if you look at it in terms of removing the spiritualistic veneer, and I can also say that I find that very appropriate in view of my experience over the past 20 years with grassroots traditional people and their sense of spirituality. They don't have a spiritual veneer. The whole thing that we have in Christianity with the sort of, the concept of God that we have in Christianity, it's so very remote from how people who have a very spiritual, they're as spiritual as they are embodied in this life. But they, the concepts of spirituality and God that we have inherited in the West are, pretty alien to them.
They're very esoteric. The way that I view esoteric is this: you can only experience it within. There's nobody else who can teach it to you. You have to experience it within. And one thing that the Western world has done, they've done this with law, is by saying, we're going to ask you some questions like, do you understand? Which means something different in legal language than it does in English. And it's this, in a sense, it's a power play. It's same thing in the medical industry. Only we can speak this language, even though you're speaking the same words as us. We have a different definition, and that holds different meaning and power. And I kind of feel the same has happened with some religions, esoteric nature, even though I do believe there is some beauty to actual esoteric wisdom, which can only be found within. I've also noticed in my travels through Mesoamerica, South America, Australia, pretty much all across the world, and having met indigenous shamanic cultures, their spirituality seems to be they're already swimming in it. It has to do with the actual plants in front of them, the animals, the practices, the things they do with their bodies and their vocal cords, in a sense where they see spirit. We are of the spirit. This is it. This is what we're looking at, rather than something that no. It's something that none of us can see. You have to be highly specialized to see it, and that's where kind of hierarchy within religions really started becoming almost what scientism seems today. This only we can understand the data, or only we understand, have the best science, or only we really have the legal or foreign policy expertise to be able to explain what's happening, and putting everybody else on like a lower pedestal that we don't understand, nor could we take care of ourselves. That's kind of where I feel religion in the West has kind of pushed us over the many past hundreds, if not thousands of years, definitely all the way back to the, Constantinople, rechanging making the King James version of the Bible and actually changing the stories and harvesting from older stories and turning them into newer ones, while all the while changing the meaning of it. It is very difficult to actually look through religious texts and make meaning out of it. And I think people today have connected a lot of dots between different religions and some spiritual values for sure. But I'm curious, with you having looked into this, because you even spoke getting into, and I'm not sure, is this Pierre Sabak when you're talking about the etymological work? Okay, yes. I like Pierre. I've actually done talks with him over in Europe. I really like his work. So you say with his etymological work, the Adamic race, and I want to ask about what this is, because I'm really trying to get the audience to understand some alternative ideas of how we've arrived today as what we would call modern humans. The Adamic race was genetically manipulated to make the humans sexually compatible to the non-humans, being, I would imagine, the ETs that you're speaking about. Could you explain a little bit about that, like the Adamic race? How do people understand this, coming from just conventional thoughts of history, to kind of like explain what that means, the Adamic race and the genetic manipulation?
Well, that's the word Adam, which has to do with, in ancient Hebrew, with the color red. It's associated with the planet Mars. On the other hand, you've got the color red that is esoterically very potently connected with blood and the meanings of blood. So, in the wider arc of what you're talking about, whether we be or not the Adamic race, my concern isn't so much, whether we are or not the Adamic race. What is clear, however, from all the research that is happening, and insiders from the Vatican who give information, it's very clear that we have been, as a species, the humans have been tweaked. Rather than outright created. How were we originally the very, very first version of human, what we call human today? How was that created? I'm not going to venture any kind of guess. I have my own kind of inner, let's say, mystical sense of it, but I'm not going to go today. However, it's very clear that there have been contributions from different other cultures, from other galaxies, other planetary systems, what have you. And, they are mainly Orion, Pleiades, Sirius, in most of the literature. So it stands to reason that there would have been different contributions either before the seeding of a new sort of human evolutionary episode, or just after some cataclysm to be able to restart something new. And some of those contributions were very benevolent, and some of those contributions were less benevolent. And my sense of what the Anunnaki and their successors, the Elohim, with their Adamic, what we call the Adamic race, the tweaking that they did, it was not an outright creation. I mean, the God of Christianity claims to have created us. Well, no, we've been around for millions and millions of years. So, no, I mean, there was some tweaking. And who actually did the tweaking? I mean, this is, I don't want to go into speculation, but it's pretty clear by now, with the research that exists and with the kind of sense that one can have by going back in time in meditative practices. It's clear that we've had contributions to who we are from various sources. So that's enough for me. We're an intergalactic melting pot of a race. Yeah. And, instead of looking at that as, oh, they turned us into a slave race. Well, they bloody well did turn us into a slave race, and we did something with it. We took our victimhood, and today, is the time when we have to look that victimhood square in the eye and decide what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And apart from that, Ben, I really like very much the way you brought in the esoteric aspect. For me, it's a very important point to understand that the religious constructions that have brainwashed us and subjected us and sacrificed us and impoverished us, in spite of the good things that are embedded in the religions, they would not they would not have been able to continue existing if they were not containing some very good, deep truths. But the way they have repackaged them to make them, to oversimplify them for the people and to keep the esoteric nuggets for the elite, so that the elite better control the people. That's a really crucial point for us to understand. The people who take the Bible, the good Christians who are good people who take, the Bible literally, they do not realize that it's been written and rewritten and rewritten. And their beloved King James Version, they need to know that in the few years before having the King James Version prepared, said King James got really interested in witch trials, witch burnings, and demonology. And his first opus before doing the King James Bible was a book on demonology, which had to do with his deep involvement, his deep interest in the witch hunt. So people need to realize that.
Which is the same push as the eradications of shamanic tribes, and specifically the shamans of all over. I mean, obviously, I'm in the Americas, so it wasn't too long ago, even though it's funny how we seem to have forgotten how many millions of indigenous there actually were here, and just in a few short centuries, you don't see any of them walking down the street. Honestly, I can remember the last time I saw one because I intentionally went to a reservation where they are, but you don't even see them around here. And it's very interesting, not just because many of the indigenous here, and I know that there was indigenous eradication everywhere, and I definitely want to at some point talk about what we spoke about earlier, which is some of the shamanic influences throughout Mongolia, what is now today Russia, China, throughout that entire landmass is such rich diversity of culture and shamanic influence and knowledge of nature, knowledge of the plants and the fungi and the balance of nature. And we barely hear anything about that, such a scarce history. But with the indigenous here, nothing was really written down. They actually embedded many of their much of their cultural wisdom in, as you spoke about earlier, in their weavings, in their adornments, what they would wear, in their dances, in how they would set up their teepees and set up entire encampments. There was a lot of, you could say, astrological and also just deeply cultural symbols embedded in their lifestyle, and in that sense books were burned by just the eradication of their lifestyle. And you're definitely right, the changing of these books, yes, you can read some passages that they ring true with some kind of meaning here, but what I think most people don't realize is there's deeper elements to language and how language ripples through the generations, and how speaking a word today, one could just be Omicron, because that's a Greek word, or letter, I should say, but just how these words actually have almost epigenetic power, almost like mudras and things along those lines. So you're right. The rewriting of many of these stories, we're losing an original intention, almost as if it was a vow or it's a prayer, and we're losing a lot of its original intention. And it does feel like, as you get to in this book, that all the institutions out there that are parading around as for our best good and for our highest spiritual or even just health-wise livelihoods are actually interested in the exact opposite. They're parading around under the guise of having our best interest in mind, but are interested in precisely the opposite.
This is the inversion. This is the,
Machiavellian sort of.
Language has been poisoned, for a very, very long time. I'm glad you mentioned the indigenous traditions, because, and the unwritten traditions, you know, it's a totally different thing to learn something with your whole heart, mind, soul, body, being, from, you know, from the moment you're born, and learning things from books which themselves, you know, may have been, you know, written with an agenda. So language is an obsession of mine, because it's really, really difficult to speak now with a common understanding of the words that we're using. And you know, there's all the perversions of meaning that have happened in the, particularly, you know, since the 20th century, with, you know, the conscious use of propaganda, PR, you know, the legacy of Bernays and you know, all this kind of stuff. People are using words, you know, let's take the word religion. You know, in principle, religion, we think, you know, religion is a good thing because it connects us with, you know, the spiritual side of ourselves. But when you look at what the reality of religion truly is, as a machinery, as a force influencing, steering, exploiting human beings, animals, the whole of nature. You know, you mentioned in your, you know, in something that you said earlier, that scientism today, science is behaving like a religion. Well, that's, you know, one of the points that I make in the book. It's exactly the same device that has worked, you know, for the gods of earlier times, for the God of Christianity, and that sort of became seamlessly transitioned into a religion of money, which, you know, tends to be called capitalism, and then the religion of science that is lording it over us now, and has nothing to do with the true endeavor of humans, you know, seeking true knowledge in an open fashion. You know, these are all closed systems. They're closed systems which do their utmost to prevent the growth of the human being into his or her true essence, true beingness and true potential, and true implementation of what we are here on this planet to do. So going back to, you know, language, when you live and you work and you try and learn from and with illiterate people, I have been so much amongst what we call indigenous people. I've been in peasant societies, you know, of Asia mainly, who retain a substratum of what we would call indigenous beliefs. And it's very clear to me that these people have a natural esoteric mooring in reality, in life, in, you know, this embodied life, and how it communicates with the unseen life of nature, of the sky, and of the spirits, the good and the bad spirits. And, you know, that's a lot of what we've lost. We don't realize that we're swimming in an ocean of spirits all around us. And that, you know, there are a lot of them that are pretty yucky. Mm-hmm. You know, if we realize that, we would be able to name them, we would be able to conduct our negotiations with them as sovereign human beings with our own spirits, and we'd be able to, well, to get out of the mess, you know, in which we collectively are right now.
Yeah. You know, I feel a lot of what's happening in the world right now really does have to do with word magic. A lot of the ways that we are spoken about, we also don't realize like the words themselves have their meaning, and then those meanings are also changing. Merriam-Webster was originally concerned about the Constitution being under attack here in the United States because of the changing of words. If you could change the meaning of the words, then you can change the Constitution just by a backhanded way of coding it differently. Yeah. And then now you look at Merriam-Webster dictionaries. Obviously, it's not Merriam-Webster anymore. The edifice that has taken over it is now changing the meaning of words, and this is something that history has examples of. But another thing about that is also the framing of the words that are used. A lot of the times, I think, Gordo, you were mentioning the Hegelian dialectic, but the way you frame something makes it seem like it can only be this or it can only be that. And in many ways, both a yes or a no, or a for this and a against that, in mainstream politics and media, it all comes back to we are the disempowered. There's always something coming to get us. There's always a fear state that has been accessed within us through chemical cascades that is left on drip feed. It's kind of like the faucet is left dripping constantly of these stress hormones that make us also predictable and very impressionable. And we have this concept of us now that we need doctors to tell us how to be healthy. We need scientists to tell us how the world works, that we can't see it on the face of it. Our common sense is, defunct. We need to look towards the gods, which are now look towards the ones who have all the data, look towards the ones who have the multinational corporations that have the resources to help us. These are the gods, and we have diminished ourselves in a way, and that is a forgetting of who and what we are, forgetting that we ourselves are magicians. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. What power we have as human beings that we are cutting ourselves off from, and what's the main culprit to how we cut ourselves off from our own power?
Well, we now perpetuate the conditioning that we've received for, the past 6 millennia, basically. It's been, really expertly done by the priestly castes. Yeah. What I call the priestly classes, which are basically those people who are the holders of the esoteric knowledge, the esoteric tools, and the way the esoteric stuff goes hand in hand with coercion, with, brute force. So, they've been manipulating the mixture of brute force and esoteric tricks, which they hold very close to to themselves, and they don't share. And that's why they need, their lineages to keep this stuff both alive, operative, and hidden from us. Now, if you look at us, the mass of the common people, and if you look at us not from the perspective of, okay, Ben, you are really well read, so am I. So, perhaps some people would say it's difficult to lump us in with the common people, but no, we are for the priestly, castes. We belong to that sort of amorphous mass of people who may think that they know a lot, especially because they've been through our universities where we've, pumped their heads full of false truth, which is the meaning of krivda, by the way. It's not outright lies. It's crooked. It's truth made crooked, basically. Yeah. So, we've it's very difficult for us from a strictly intellectual point of view. That's the other aspect. We have been formatted, those of us who have an ability to think, we've been formatted to divorce the head from the heart and the body. And this applies across the board now, everybody. Unless you are really a barefoot peasant, even in the third world, people who live in cities are, well, the heads that are divorced from the rest of the human body soul. So, it's the cutting up in pieces of who we are as a totality is one major aspect of it. The antagonism that the Christian church engineered, the antagonism between the dirty body and the lofty soul that could be saved to go and, be up there singing in the heavenly choir with the angels. We are still living, with the deep trauma of being a soul separate from our bodies. I walk around and I look around and I talk to people, and I see mainly people whose souls are not anchored in their bodies. They're not anchored in the physical being to be able to do what they're supposed to do on earth now. So, our job is to try and bring it all back together again with the help of the real tools that, because they've been esoterically hidden from us, we cannot put them together again exoterically. We need to recover our own esoteric natural sense of who we are. This is a really big topic, which I have not gone into the detail of in the book, because otherwise it would have been another, 300 pages. And it's really, I have been fortunate. When I lived in India, I had the challenging privilege of landing in a tradition of fringe tantric, at the fringe of Tantra, at the fringe of Sufism, esoteric practitioners, who, to my knowledge, are the only people on earth who call their path the human path. And if they had a capital letter, they would put capital letters on human and path. But there again, most languages around the world don't have capital letters like we have in, the Latin-based languages. So they are people who, consider this is India, the country that has the greatest number of so-called gods and goddesses. Mm-hmm. These are people who say we have no gods, no priests, and no religion. We have a human path. And it's a deeply esoteric, but deeply practical path. And that's the point. The point is that if we are going to recover who we are both embodied, highly physical, and great beings from the universe. We are both. We are not or, we are and. Yeah. And that is our challenge. The challenge is to bring back into this embodiment that multidimensionality of who we really are. And at the same time, you've got a lot of people who say, yes, we are spiritual beings having an embodied experience on earth. Well, that's kind of a I understand that as a kind of consumeristic attitude. Oh yes, so we float down into a human body and we come to this sort of supermarket of earth, and we're going to have a human experience, and it may be painful and it may be joyful, but what's the point? What's the point of the huge amount of energy that has to be invested by the soul to form a new body, by the parents who are going to provide the physical, the emotional, and if all goes well, the spiritual and the multi-dimensional nurturance for a very imperfect infant to become an adult that, who can stand on their own two legs. The amount of energy that we have to take from the environment, what we call the environment, the nature that is part and parcel of us, that is not just around us as an environment. Mm-hmm. The meaning environment means that is the environs, it surrounds us, as opposed to being part and parcel of us. The huge amount of energy that it takes to get us to the point where we can start thinking that we are having a human experience on Earth. No, I mean, that's not the way it works. We are here for a purpose. And we've been cut off from that purpose. We have been used, the purpose of us for the past 6 millennia has been to be, the fodder, the food, the providers of energy, the providers of devotion, the providers of taxes, the providers of sacrificial victims to the systems. So, they've derived a huge amount of energy from us. But if we start to realize how much we've provided to them and we start reclaiming that for ourselves, well, gradually or fast, you start to realize experientially inside yourself, in your flesh, your bones, and your knowingness, you start realizing that you really are a different kind of being. But we've accepted the challenges of having what seems to be a frail body, which is in fact an absolutely extraordinary thing. I mean, I don't know. Some people call it a machine. I refuse to call it a machine. I'm not going to use the technological terms.
Yeah.
So, vehicle is not just. It's a miracle. It's okay, and it is in multidimensional, constant communication with all the rest of what we are.
Yeah.
Now that is what we have to cultivate, but we have been deprived of the traditions that taught us how this was done.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to go deep inside. We can take inspiration from books, from, indigenous elders, if we are, have the opportunity to live close to such people, and they will be kind enough to teach us, because, okay, we are the white people. Even though we did not commit the horrors of colonialism and, various forms of genocide, we still carry that collective
symbol.
Karma, not in, karma in a very, not in a moralistic sense, in an energetic sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, living in these villages in Asia, I have very, very strongly, even though I was taken in and I was taught all sorts of stuff and I have really internalized a lot of stuff, but I have felt very, very clearly that I somehow have a responsibility to carry some of that, that burden of the collective burden of my ancestors. The ancestors of this present embodiment of me. Although, in past embodiments, I've been a tribal princess and I've been, an hermit on a Japanese mountain. It's in this particular lifetime, I carry part of that collective karma. And, because we go from life to life, well, we get shares of the collective karma of different human groups, human cultures over time and space, which basically all means that there is the one oversoul of the whole of humankind, that if we individually reclaim the connectivity, the true interactiveness of what we are as physical and subtle, as spirit and body, spirit and soul, and a live heart. If we bring all these things together, then we are contributing to the great oversoul of the whole of humankind. Experience and knowledge that it needs for its evolution.
Yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts on, because I feel what you're saying, and to really honor that, to really celebrate that oversoul, to bring back that connection, that subtle and very real connection. What are the types of daily, and not just daily, but like daily things we can do to engage more deeply with that, as well as things that we can do in community, or is just community itself also a really good tool here? I want to help kind of explore what are some of the ways back to remembering who we are without having to have it be held to some, but you got to prove it to some peer-reviewed group. Really honoring who and what we are without going too off into imagination, grounded, centered here. But what are the practices that you believe are the best bang for your buck, if you will? Daily practices as well as, community things. What do you think is going to help humanity right now?
Breath.
Mm.
All the great traditions have, breathing practices. And in indigenous traditions, the most important thing that had to happen after a child was born was for the child to breathe properly, not through the mouth. It doesn't need to be lofty. The main thing that people have to do, the most important part, if you're going to meditate, if you're going to go anywhere, breath. Because it's both happening in the physicality of our airways in our body, but it's also, respiration, spirit is about breath. The psyche, the Greek word for soul, means breath as much as it means soul. The breath is absolutely fundamental. And I used to do all sorts of pranayama. I've done yoga. I've done all those things. Since writing this book, I've come down to the simplest, not doing any techniques anymore. It's breathing, but actually allowing myself to be breathed. And
I like that.
Okay. You might say, well, how do you do that? What's the technique? There is no bloody technique. Okay.
We're always looking for the formula or the way we can package it.
That's the thing, Ben. The most important thing is that, when we're looking for solutions, the solutions are inside us, but they may not seem to be solutions. And they may seem to be so simplistic. I'm not saying simple, simplistic. We get judgmental about something that is simple. We have to go to the nuts and bolts of what is life. And it's basically, we know that we have to eat the right kind of clean foods and things like that. And it's so difficult now because poison is literally everywhere. Well, fundamentally, it's breath and water that keeps us alive. And then food comes, further down. If push comes to shove, if we could just breathe correctly, be breathed correctly by the universe that lives inside us. And if we could water our soul and our physiology with living, loving water that we can restructure, that we can take the dirty water that is around us. And okay, we've got devices, there are all sorts of ways, but there's also strictly the love that we can project from our own hearts. This has been proven by Emoto and many other people. And using clay, clay as a food is a medicine. It's a vector of information from Mother Earth to us. I would say these are the three most important, simple, but fundamentally deeply complex and interdimensional things that we can cultivate as a meditative practice, or I prefer to say contemplation, because meditation is too active in a way. In meditation, I find, this may be because I'm a woman also, I find that there is too much scope for the ego to come in, too much scope for spiritual bypassing, too much scope for not going to the nakedness of the nakedness of who we are. You know, and when you go to that nakedness, it's phenomenal. I mean, you know, it's. I say the word. Yeah, I use the word nakedness in a very positive sense, in a very kind of pristine sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you start developing that the sense of reality, the reality of our embodied life here on Earth, as opposed to the virtual, augmented, simulated things that they're trying to substitute, you know, to trap us in an Ahrimanic, a falsified version of Earth, a falsified version of human, a falsified version of life. When we go to the deep into the experiencing of what those things are, where we are beyond words, you know, we are beyond being able to make commentaries to ourselves about what that experience is. Well, then we are at the ground of where the reality of both this life and its interconnection with the broader life of the numinous worlds, you know, becomes real. And then we acquire the ability to be the, you know, people like to say, co-creative actors of life on this planet, with this planet. You know, you mentioned community. I'm a very kind of private kind of person. So, you know, I interact with the people in the villages, you know, where I have lived. But I'm not the type of person who is going to build an intentional community. You know, if it happens spontaneously because people come to me, that's another thing, right? But for the time being, my urgency is to build community with Earth, with our planet, as a great being. And, you know, she is the missing piece in the discourse that we're hearing all over the place, you know, of people, you know, building communities and doing regenerative agriculture and permaculture and, you know, doing all the good stuff. But they're all treating nature as passive, basically. She has to be protected. Well, yes, she has to be protected, but hey, we're way more vulnerable than she is, you know. So we are to be her custodians. Well, I'm sorry, she's not an infant. You know, she is one great being that took an embodiment here to establish a partnership with a particular race of beings, which is the human, the anthropos. And that's fundamentally what it's all about. And this is what the gods and the religions and the systems have wanted to keep us divorced from. Fundamentally, we've got what I understand, you know, this is partly my subjective understanding of, you know, the Gnostic myth of Sophia and the human being, okay? The Gnostics sort of construed the human being part of it more kind of moralistically, and I think they went away from the real myth that you find other parts of in India, basically. So, in the Gnostic myth, Sophia is basically an eon, one of those great beings up close to the source of the universe. And she and her male pal up there have this great plan that they hatch together. And she is so enthusiastic about it that she falls out of her place out there, you know, with the gang of great beings up there, plotting the creation of worlds and things like that. And she tumbles down into space, and she lands in this corner of the galaxy, and she starts materializing her dream, which is to become a planet. But you know, the difference between her and other planets is that she has brought the whole of her soul being, of her spirit being, into this planet. Now, you know, another approach is to consider, there is a very interesting guy called George Kavasilas, whom I reference in the book. And he comes to a complementary vision of this through his experience as an experiencer of all sorts of ET realities, which I can't, you know, I've never been there, I don't know. But he understands that Earth is it's a kind of living library of everything that exists everywhere in the universe. All the life forms, all the idea forms, everything. And now, when she came and materialized here, she forgot. I mean, she came down on her own, and her male counterpart didn't come down with her. Now, the best piece of mythology that accounts for the male part of it, which is the masculine principle, okay, is the Indian Purusha in the Rig Veda. And this Purusha, which is basically the great human being as a pure idea out there, the being of that great human being idea splits itself up into all sorts of life forms and eventually comes down to Earth and starts materializing as a human being. Now, you know, how these mythological renditions would be able to be coordinated with actual archaeological, paleo-archaeological stuff, recovered histories, the day we get into the, you know, Library of the Vatican, I haven't a clue. But it makes, to me, it makes absolute sense. You know, from a deep contemplative perspective, it makes sense to me that all of us, be we women or men, we are embodiments of a human principle that is the match or the companion, the partner to the feminine principle that took an embodiment as this extraordinary planet. And frankly, I don't believe, you know, contrary to those who say, you know, there are zillions of other planets like Earth all over the place. We're very insignificant, you know, it's no big deal. No, I don't agree with that. I think this planet is very, very extraordinary. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think, you know, I know this in my bones. Yeah. And that we have a particular extraordinary journey to restart with her. Now that we've been through 6,000 years of loss of soul, of loss of ourselves, and that we are now at a juncture where we have to recover ourselves. And we have to do it the direct way. We can't indulge, you know, those of us who have not already had, you know, decades of meditative practice and things like that. Well, we don't have time for that. We have to go straight for the reality of it. And the reality of it is right there under our feet. And so, you know, to go back to your question, breath is absolutely essential. But it's not me controlling my breath. It's being breathed. And when you accept, you agree to lean into being breathed, you discover all sorts of other stuff. And you know, and it's going to be different for each person. So, you know, there again, I'm being very humble when I'm saying this. I'm being very assertive and very humble at the same time, because this is what came to me as a result of writing this book. Having the liberation effect of going through the hell of what has been done to us, coming out, you know, digesting it, and taking that energy and claiming it for myself and for my relationship with my Mother Earth. It has produced a completely different approach to being my contemplative self. And I'm not going to say it's all easy, because then you've got the challenge of bringing that contemplative self more and more into your day-to-day embodied, doing stuff in the world self.
Yeah, bringing it into this world, embodying it, bringing that gift and even that memory. I forget, it was Purusha, the Indian or Sanskrit word you were mentioning about the ideal self, but rooting it here in action. In action, I also mean the action that may not arise from our own egoic agency, but being breathed, and what that could also be called. I definitely feel you when it comes to the relationship with Earth, and I feel, at least for me, and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent on this, but I feel that there's a relationship there, that nature in and of itself has its many ways of experiencing it. You can experience it within through meditation. You can experience it through Tai Chi. You can experience it on a walk, making love, and also gardening. But there is, I believe that, there are specific things like our diet. It's a staple, and many people they get lost in the religious fancy of this is just a temporary experience, and this is the illusion. So my diet doesn't matter. And you mentioned the water. I just have to mention that I think it was Abby Martin that just reported on this on December 7th, just 2 days ago, in Hawaii. I think it was Oahu. There, many thousands of people's drinking water was poisoned with petrochemicals, basically by the Navy, and the Navy's covering it up and not doing anything about this. And there's something deeper than just people accidentally drinking some petrochemicals. It's also the intelligence of water as well. And I found that indigenous and shamanic traditions across the world that I spoke with were so adamant about waterways and clean water and pure water and protecting the waterways, and that being very vital and integral, as well as like keeping the oil where it is, rather than pumping it and allowing for what seems to be happening not just in the Amazon but across the world, but the destruction of the waterways, and how that is reflected within each of us. I find it very interesting. What I picked up from a lot in this book, and I'm surprised we haven't even gotten into yet, which I would love to at least ask one or two questions about. Where do you see this going from here? Because there's a lot. I can put it in terms of, for the audience's sake, things that I have spoken of as the transhuman agenda and where technology is going here. I think we've already kind of gotten to the underlying point of it, which would be to drive a wedge between self or humans and nature and the earth, but also from one another, and wedge a smart device in between each and every one of us, so it's mediated, it's also captured in some sense. I would love to hear your thoughts on how you see this agenda of separating us from ourselves, the memory of who and what we truly are, as well as separating us from nature. What are the main culprits that you see right now in the world, that maybe people should be aware of, or at least see the institutions or the fields that these main dangers are coming from, that are really cutting us off from our nature?
Well, it's, what is being done today in that respect is the continuation and the perfecting of what was really started expertly by the Christian Church, where there's the separation of the body and the soul, and the body belongs to nature. The vilification of women. The only way to be a good mother is to be a virgin mother like Mary, which is totally impossible for most women. in all healthy, kind of sane early traditions, women are on a continuum with nature, being, embodiments of the feminine principle with a capital F. And so the body is dirty, and nature is basically just a given and a passive, unenlightened thing for the Christian religion. And there's one place in the book where I mention what a very deep Italian author has found. He's discovered that there was one particular council close to the year 900. It's really difficult to find information about that council on internet, so they've covered it up. But that council decided in its fulminations against paganism, that they still were not able to eradicate, in spite of all the, going after heretics and things like that. Around the years 900, 1000, the church was still bemoaning the fact that the little people around Europe were still believing in their pagan beliefs. And so they decided that they had to go for the jugular. And there was this edict of that council that all the great multi-century trees or 1,000-year trees that existed all over Europe, that were, like the sacred groves, they were the places where the old sort of shamanic sense of traditional cultures was still preserved, was still alive. And, these great trees were also crucial for the ecosystems. So the church said that, these trees were the work of the devil, and that the devil was thus influencing the people, and to save the souls of the people, they had all these great trees pulled out, chopped down, pulled out, and they erected their own churches on those places, which were places of power. So that's, my heart bleeds when I think of how those trees would have felt and how the people of those times would have felt witnessing those crimes against nature, basically, and crimes against the connection between humans and nature. So it's interesting to mention that one, because that one is not, capitalism going after nature. That is purely the religious institution, clearly saying that its enemy is the power of nature, the spiritual embodied power of nature in the ancient great trees. So then, it logically follows that, if you're going to be in a system that is so anti-nature, so fearful of nature, that you have to eradicate, her great embodiments, well, you're going to go after nature, but you're going to exploit it. Under capitalism, when you shift from the religion of the Christian God to the religion of money, well, you're going to keep commodifying nature. You're going to keep hurting her. You're going to keep hurting the relationship between humans and nature, and you're going to monetize everything, both the natural resources that you get out of nature and the labor of humans. So until approximately the Industrial Revolution, most of us were peasants. And no matter how oppressed we were, we had our natural connection with nature. And no matter how much the church had vilified nature and our relationship with nature, well, we still communed with nature. We still knew how to tend our fields, how to put, cow dung on the fields to fertilize it. We knew how to leave it fallow when it was necessary. And, well, we converted some of our nature beliefs. We sort of syncretized them with Christian beliefs, but if you scratch under the surface, you would still find all the old nature beliefs underneath. But then with the Industrial Revolution and the colonial enterprise, which happened at the same time, huge masses of peasant people were moved to the big factories and to the plantations in the colonies and in the European centers, where they lost everything, and that's where the people who were poor in monetary terms before that as peasants, but they were still rich in terms of a life that had purpose and meaning in nature, and in celebration of the various cycles of life. And it was still a rich life, even though they had no money, very little money. Now you've got people, the lumpen proletariat, making a pittance. So they're making money, but they've lost everything else. And, the only thing that they can still more or less own is their body. But also at the same time, you've got the rise of what is going to become modern medicine, where people no longer own their bodies. You've got the rise of standardized schooling, where people no longer own the natural knowledge that they can have, and that they can expand, and the spiritual connection that they can have with the complexity of interdimensionality. Everybody gets formatted, and all of that is reaching its culmination now. So our separation from nature, which it's been phenomenally accelerated with the industrial revolution, and the last few decades of consumerism, and as you say, an increasing amount of devices, of technology that owns us instead of us owning it. So that people are afraid of nature. A lot of people who are, geeky and they're living with their devices, a tree, why the hell should I go and sit under a tree?
Exactly.
And a lot of people, it's astonishing how women have learned to hate their bodies because they menstruate and they procreate. So the bodies of women have become huge problems for women. I mean, this is particularly true in the developed West, but it's creeping in the big cities of the developing world. So our bodies have become a major problem, and so we have to solve our bodies. So what better way to solve our bodies than to get rid of the bio part of it and, make it all as cyber and as techno as possible. And, we're afraid of nature. The number of urban friends I have who say, oh, I'd love to go and visit you in your village, but there are mosquitoes. Well, yes, there are mosquitoes. Oh, and there are snakes and spiders. Well, yes, there are snakes and spiders in nature, more, everywhere around the world. So people are fixated on the things about nature that are frightening. They're fixated on dark versus light. This is a really important one in the spiritual field. Everybody wants to be enlightened, be it as a transhumanist or as a spiritualist. And everybody is afraid of the dark. We've got the dark forces. But basically, we are afraid of the natural darkness of night. We're afraid of going into the dark night of the soul. We're going, it's, the darkness of the fertile earth, the darkness of caves, the darkness of night. This is where dreams are hatched, where new life happens, and where new wisdom comes to us. So, that's another really important thing. We've been dissociated from nature with a false dark, a falsely, fearsome dark, and a false light also. People are afraid of light. People are afraid of the sun because it's going to give you cancer when you actually need vitamin D. And if God knows, I'm very white-skinned with, pale eyes. Living where I live and being a peasant, I should be permanently fried by the sun. Well, I'm not. If you've got the correct relationship with the different beings of nature, well, they're not going to hurt you. Snakes don't come and attack me. And, I have a chit chat with the mosquitoes and, please leave me alone. And if one of them still doesn't want to leave me alone, okay, I'm going to use a bit of essential oils. Sorry, guys, but you can negotiate you can have a partnership with the different beings of nature such that you're going to have a partnership with them. And, I'm no advanced initiate on the path of rediscovering who I am in my partnership with nature, but I can tell you it's so yummy. I wouldn't exchange anything for it. And, this is where I'm discovering what I'm supposed to be doing on this earth. As a human, having a privileged relationship of partnership with nature. And the more of us who do this individually, not intellectually, but, really from that soulful gut feeling, if we can marry our hearts and our guts and forget about the head it'll creep in anyway, but if we can, become active as partners of nature with our embodied guts and with our hearts, understanding that our hearts are a huge field of both cognition, emotion, and spiritful. I prefer to say spiritful rather than spiritual. Spiritful, activity and ability to know. We have so much to learn, Ben. We have so much to learn. It's, when you come out of this tunnel of 6,000 years and you realize what it's really all about. In very simple terms, we live on this planet of ours. If we understand that this is a great being and we can be in communication soul to soul with this great being, and she does talk, it's nonverbal, like, every spirit is nonverbal, but she's there, and she is also coming out of her own victimhood. She is coming alive and awake now. That's very much what I'm feeling. And I think, there may be indigenous people who can validate my very non-shamanic expert sense of this thing.
Yeah.
In those terms, how our relationship to nature is going to be reborn now. No longer the peasant's wisdom by default, but something else, because we've gone through soul loss. Earth has gone through soul loss. We're recovering our souls. What is it that is going to be created by us? All of us, the embodiments, as I understand it, of the primordial masculine principle, differentiated in women and men, and our phenomenal, embodiment of the feminine principle in this planet. So it's, I can't really say a lot because a lot of what I experienced there is nonverbal. And this is where, all mystics know that there's only so much that you can actually talk about. And eventually you're just going to have a mute conversation gazing in each other's eyes. That's the experience that I had when I was in India. So, either what I'm saying is authentic or it isn't, and that's up to anybody else to judge from their own knowingness. But this is very much where we're going.
It is, and it's very beautiful the way you bring that up. And I also think that you reminded me of things that I have heard along the way in studying plants and plant medicines, and also just being a documentary and going where I can and filming, I've talked with a lot of indigenous, and when I've spoken about prophecies, which I give a little bit of weight, I do, and then I also I take them as being spun in many different ways to fit whatever's happening right now. But one thing that I have heard is that the awakening, what we would call an awakening or prophecy being realized, or a great transformation that is upon us, would come mostly from those who remember. So I mean, the species is splitting in two, and it really does feel like that. But that we will draw our power, in a sense, almost just remember our power that comes from being in right relation with the earth. In all indigenous traditions that I've spoken with that have some kind of concept of what is the malady to the human existence and how is that resolved, what is the remedy to that, it always comes back to our relationship with earth and understanding that we are of the earth and we draw our power from the earth, and we don't need to serve another master. There doesn't need to be something else in between that relationship, that it is ours by being alive, by being human and on earth. It is already inherent, that relationship. However, it almost seems to me that in relationships in general, my wife knows that I love her. My daughter and my boys know that I love them. That doesn't excuse me from offering gestures and showing it, and whether saying it in words or time or presence or whatever it might be, support, sometimes gifts. All these are gestures, like a language in some sense. But it seems like we've gone deficient in our gestures towards our relationship with Mother Earth. It's almost a given, like what a spoiled child would do with their gifts. Like, forget that these are actual gifts and take them as, well, I'm owed these things. And I don't believe this is inherent within us. I believe that it has been conditioned into us. And we've gone about an hour and a half, and I don't want to keep rambling on. This is incredible, but there's one thing I wanted to share from your book. I wanted the audience to hear a little bit of the way that you've written it, which I absolutely love. There's this one paragraph. It's on page 257 under the heading "False Androgyny, Tipping Points, and a Definitive Savior." It says, the year 2020 has abruptly inaugurated a bewildering storm of biosecurity emergency, business closures, economic collapse, societal fracture, and existential fear of constitutional rights and liberties snatched away from citizens as democracies turn into police states overnight, of papal pronouncements asserting a great reset, an Agenda 2030, a smart everything, the Internet of Bodies, which we've gotten into on this show, urgently made possible by the opportunity of a planetary pseudo-pandemic, of skyrocketing bonanzas for the kleptocrats, of big white, wave after wave of working people are canceled out of economic reality, a storm of destitution and hunger, the scourges never eradicated by decades of development, pounding rich and poor nations alike. What I love about it is, in one paragraph, which is just about one sentence, there's about 30 different topics that I feel we could get into. What's interesting is, in my film in 2008, Esoteric Agenda, I spoke about sustainable development and Agenda 21 at the time, which then upgraded to Agenda 2020, then Agenda 2030. You talk about the Internet of Bodies in there. And what's interesting is you are putting this under the banner of something has happened since 2020, and something is very readily, and something is happening right now that is also accelerating. So the last thing I want to ask is, do you believe that this is accelerating out of desperation? And do you feel there is hope for, and what does the hope look like as far as us retaining at least the honor of the memory of who and what we are? What do you feel we're up against right now? And I know I said, this would be the last question. That sounded like 3 questions. So let me rein it back in. What is accelerating right now? What's happening? Do you think it's of, what was the word I used? Desperation. Is it an attempt of desperation? And is there hope in your mind as where we are right now on planet Earth?
Well, in terms of acceleration, yes, there is an acceleration. This is the end game of the long game of the gods. That you mentioned earlier in the talk.
Yeah.
These 6,000 years are coming to their apotheosis and apocalypsis. All these big words suddenly become really, really tangibly meaningful. So yes, it is accelerating like crazy. It has to do with stuff that's happening in the sky. The change of a cycle going into the age of Aquarius. The figure Jesus came onto the scene with the age of Pisces, so we're now shifting it into a new age. There may be something in the cycles of Earth herself that we are not aware of. That she had to go through this 6,000 thing with us. Not to mention other episodes way further back in time. So there is an acceleration of time. There's an acceleration and an intensification of the agenda of the gods, and everything that was hidden is now. It's anybody who has eyes to see and ears to hear. It's right there. It's in your face. So it's the revelation of the method. It's all there. Now, when you've got the revelation of the method, you discover what is the nature, what has been the contents of all the deceit, all the krivda that we have, as a species gone through over the past 6,000 years for this particular episode of our evolution. And when you realize one very simple fact, that the deceit, the lies, the simulations, the making life fake, making nature fake, because that's the thing, in the previous question, it's not just us being dissociated from nature is them appropriating the nature of our bodies, the nature of the bodies of animals, of insects, of microorganisms, of, and of nature, of plants, of the meteorological phenomena. They're appropriating the bodies and the mechanisms of all that to turn it into something else, to solve life. They're putting software of life into people's bodies to solve life, because they have a problem with organic life, which is irrigated by soul life, spirit life, which is not it cannot be dissociated. So it's really important to understand that this acceleration has to do with the acceleration of fakeness, simulation, making reality false, or what they call augmented or virtual, or the different other names they come up with. And so desperation, yeah, I think some people like to say that the perpetrators of all this are increasingly desperate. That may well be in sort of psychological terms. They are on a trajectory. They cannot jump off that trajectory. It's, you might also consider that it's nearly ordained by the universe that this has to happen. And this has to happen for us to be able to unlock the lock into our own remembrance. You mentioned the importance of remembering. And it is utterly, whatever future we're going to be able to build, it will be built on our remembering who we truly are. Recovering who we truly are. Remembrance, recognition, recollection, bringing back all the pieces of soul, because we all have suffered from soul loss. Bringing back the pieces of soul so that we have a soul that is properly wedded to this body in this life for us to do what we are to do here as, joyfully creative beings with a joyfully, if there's anybody who's joyfully creative, it's this earth. I mean, it's amazing how she keeps on creating in spite of all the insults that she's been inflicted. So you also mentioned the bit about, I'm picking up the different pieces that you mentioned earlier, that we take her for granted. Yes, we have to stop taking her for granted. We have to go back to a gift economy. The healthiest economy is a gift economy amongst humans and between humans, other species, and between humans and the earth. And it's not a question of my gift has to be monetarily of exactly the same size as yours or exactly in the same time frame. No, it weaves time and space in a completely different way. So we need to remember and recover that. And, these things that I'm saying, they may seem abstract, but when you start practicing them, you go and, hug a tree. Or if you're, too self-conscious to hug a tree, go and sit under a tree and allow the tree to empty your mind and the tree to breathe you. And as the tree breathes you, you're also breathing the tree. And there's, then there's a mutual process going on. And it's not just the oxygen and the CO2. It's the, ancestral memory of the tree and the ancestral memory of the human that's happening there. And there's another thing that's really important in terms of words. There's the word prophecy that everybody's using. We have falsely introduced our sense of future foretelling into the sense of prophecy. Prophecy in Greek basically means speaking forth. So it's the speaking into this world of realities that are not visible in this world yet. So, that was the job of the shaman, of the seer, of the oracle. And, it can happen with all of us. When you allow yourself to get out of the busyness of trying to survive in a very, very sick, oppressive, disempowering system, dehumanizing. We're now, that's the other point. We're reaching the point of total dehumanization, which has already been done, on the peasants, on the indigenous populations, on all the people who've been tortured, who've been, burnt, treated like heretics, submitted to slavery conditions. All of those things are now coming, they're all coalescing. It's all coming, in an intensified form, through everything, through the water, the air, the food, through the medicine, through the work, through the money system, through the educational system, through the propaganda, through the religion. Look at what the papacy of the Catholic Church is doing now, and look at what most of the priests in the Catholic Church are, now saying it's perfectly okay to take injections which have been developed using aborted fetal cells. They're everything, absolutely everything that dehumanizes the sense of what we are as spiritful beings inhabiting these bodies and benefiting from these bodies, enabling us to conduct our journey and our mission on Earth. That's what's happening. The hope is the hope doesn't, the hope is situated at a level which is completely different from the level of what is imposed on us. There's no way we can fight with their weapons. We don't have them. But it's also that we don't come, if we come from a level, a type of thinking, a type of reasoning that is on a par with theirs, we are bound to, be subsumed by them, become part of them, or lose, whatever last shreds of humanity we have. If we stay in fear, we are their cattle, their herd, lock, stock, and barrel, and they can turn us into whatever they want. They will kidnap our souls. That's the ultimate. They want to consummate the final separation of the body and the soul of the human, because the great mystery of what it is to be a human being is to be an embodied great spirit being in a human body, a physical body on this earth, with an ability to explore and to find out more about it. And I'm going to say something a bit crazy, but I think our job is to teach the universe about these things. The universe is, it's all love. Sure, it's total potentiality, it's total love, it's total light, it's whatever you want it to be by default. But the universe needs us to do stuff. It's by us doing stuff that we prove the validity of this or that experiment wanted by the universe.
Yeah.
And us as, great beings out there in the universe who figure, yay, let's take on this challenge of a human life and let's see what we're going to do with it. So when you start looking at it from the perspective that we are great spirit beings who take on this challenging but really exciting journey on Earth in these human bodies, and that we're now in the business of recovering the memory of who we truly are and of what we're truly up to, supposed to be up to here on Earth. And you practice contemplating this, in very simple meditation. For me, everything has changed the day I started being breathed. It's as simple as that. And, those of us who I would say it is important to know where we come from in terms of the dehumanization, the victimization that we've been through. I would not I would not be here now talking to you if I had not been empowered by having gone through the tunnel of the adventures that the book Krivda encompasses. It's a complex book because it's so multifaceted, and I've made it as short as I could. If I were to cover all the topics that are in that book, it would have taken many books. But I found it was more urgent to get it out as a coherent totality, and then we can explore more things. But if one is brave enough to go through that, to go through the understanding of all the trauma that we've been subjected to for our mind conditioning, our soul conditioning, and our body conditioning, going through the trauma, finding out the truth is actually very liberating. The pain is it doesn't last for very long. Unlike trauma, which undigested will continue living from lifetime to lifetime. But if you face the reality of what caused the trauma and your emotional investment in that trauma, and you digest that, the pain is excruciating and short. Yeah. And you recover the energy that was trapped in the trauma. And when you recover that energy, then you're going to start being able to build your life, not from a falsehood, but from the reality of who you are. But and you discover who you are as you start rebuilding your life. Now, I would say that hope is most alive. I don't like the word hope, actually. I have more of a certainty. There is a certainty that this thing is going to turn around. I think you correctly mentioned the sort of bifurcation of the species. But for those of us who are going to be loyal to our commitment as a human being, understanding the huge both challenge, opportunity, and honor it is on on the scale of the universe. To be a human being is no trifling thing. So those of us who can start to understand that, we don't need hope. There is just certainty that grows every day, little by little, in your heart. As you go about doing the things that are going to be congruent with this new realization inside you. And these things are going to be very diverse. So there's no single recipe. There again, we have to be brave in terms of there's no how-to manual for where we're going. That how-to manual it's in the esoteric wisdom that it's inside us, and it's inside Mother Earth.
I love that. I just have to say, that answer was beautiful, and it was exactly what I was looking for. I'll just say the mentioning that there is an absolute certainty here. There seems to be in those who have been doing their own inner work, which is really just looking, seeking, really being present and aware with life as it moves, and I've found that most people in that position, they acknowledge that what their greatest challenge and their path is right now is to help others, is mainly helping others through this causeway of awakening to at least the very first step, which is acknowledging that there is something awry. There's something very awry right now, and not just right now, but that I've long felt that this isn't on some level this is a war, and then almost on a meta level, this also has to happen. This is in a sense part of an agreement or a contract that we have in some respect consented to. That there's an aspect of what we are going through that is, we can find boogeymen in it, we can find enemies in it, we can point out specifics of it, but at the end of it, there is a gift in it that is very important to acknowledge. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I want to make sure that the audience sees this book, Krivta, The God Tricks Against the Matrix. Look at the cover now, just for a second. See if I can get it out of the.
I can pull it up too.
And
I'll pull it up for it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
This is such a comprehensive book that gets into things that have taken me the better part of 15 years to really get to the bottom of. So I really appreciate that you have nailed it in such a way in this book. And in the show notes, we have where people can get access to this book. And also, I guess the last thing that I want to mention here is, the last thing I want to ask is, for your website and everything, do you what's the next step for you? Definitely getting this book out, but how do you foresee getting this book out to the world? And is there any last thing you want the audience to know before we wrap?
It's readily available as an ebook, and well, as regards the print version, for this kind of book, a lot of people will prefer the print version so that they can scribble on it, and it's easy to, well, anyway, whatever, for this kind of book, a print is probably better, but
yeah.
I have the logistical problem of being out here, where I have printed a bunch of copies, such as the one that you have, but we've got the logistical issues of transport disruption, and another aspect is that, you know, I'm, you know, just my own operation. It's just me doing this. And so I'm dependent on PayPal for receiving, you know, payments for things. And PayPal for this country is already making it impossible for individuals to receive payments.
Wow.
Which means, yeah, now we're being, you know, we're being cornered in every direction. So I'm now trying to get the book printed in the States by a company called BookBaby, which is an aggregator, a print-on-demand and distributor. It's proving to be immensely complex. I've been, you know, battling the printing process with these people for the past month. What happened here was done, you know, it was done here in this third world country with no problem whatsoever. It's being very, very difficult for, you know, for getting this. Eventually we'll get there. You know, I'm just being very patient and persistent, and eventually we'll get there and people will be able to get it more easily in the States instead of having to wait for, some people have had to wait for I think you had to wait for 2 months before you got it. Or
yeah,
I had to wait. Yeah, it took 2 months from the time I posted it from Southeast Asia. So, and I don't expect that, you know, those timeframes are going to get any better, since this crisis is going to get more and more acute. So if people are patient, I can send them a copy from here. I'm happy to send them a signed copy. And I found a workaround for payments. But other than that, if, you know, yeah, the other thing about sending from here is that the shipping is, you know, as expensive as the book. So ultimately, people may want to wait for the, you know, my BookBaby printing solution to have been resolved, and in the meantime, they can get the ebook.
Beautiful.
And another solution is that I can send the PDF, and they can print it back home.
There you go. There you go. I have to say,
so, we have to do workarounds now. The economy as we knew it is falling apart, and so yeah, that's
staying with the flow for sure. Right. Yeah, things are changing. We got to stay with the flow, and we also have to support those who are doing the good work. I really implore anyone who's interested in this work. This book is really in depth, and it is not overly vague or general. It gets straight to the point. I would highly encourage anybody, if you're gonna get the book, support in any way that you can. I think this is really important. This is also an aspect of making it a gift as well, a gift for a gift. Not that one gift necessitates the returning of a gift, but in the growing community, whether you're in physical proximity to your community or not, we definitely need to support one another who see what's developing now and who can put words around it, but also show that this is not out of our grasp. What's going on in the world, as we already said, is necessary, is a very part of what is awakening and transforming within and through us and for us. This is happening for us. So I don't want to go too deep on that. All I want to say is I really respect everybody who keeps coming back to this show. Thank you so much for joining us, being so active in the chats. This was such a deep conversation. I didn't get to some of the questions that were there, but we'll have to have you back at some point. I really appreciate your time. I want to say thank you to who you are. We didn't even get into much of the background of you that I really wanted to get into. This just means that there's a lot more we can dig into. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we do this every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Today was an hour late because our guest is coming in from Southeast Asia. And with that, I appreciate all of the feedback. I appreciate all the support. Everything that we're doing here really is thanks to and because of you at home. It really is because of this relationship that we have. I've learned so much just from being able to do the work that I do. I learn immensely. I call this the school of life. And it's really beautiful. So thank you all for joining us. I have to say that we're bowing out for tonight. Tomorrow I'm going to have an acoustic song that I can show for all of you. Thank you, Anna, for your time. Good morning to you as well.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and it's you're a really astute host, and you keep your guests on their toes.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You keep me on my toes. This book has had me on my toes for quite some time now. So I really appreciate it. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty much going to leave it there. I love all of you deeply. I love all of you who send me thanks for what I do. I love all of you who challenge what I do. All of it is very important. So let's keep this train going. We are in very interesting times, pregnant with opportunity and possibility. Be graceful, be a dancer, be a singer, and remember that we can play through this thing called life. I love all of you. I'll catch y'all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.